I'm Jessica, 29 years old, and I just discovered something that made my blood run cold. My entire family booked a week-long luxury resort vacation to Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, complete with oceanfront suites, spa packages, and premium dining experiences. The total cost? $18,000. The payment method? My personal credit card that they used without permission. Here's the kicker though. 3 days before I found out about their elaborate plans, I had quietly canceled that very same card after discovering suspicious charges. They have no idea that their dream getaway is about to become a nightmare of their own making. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Phoenix, Arizona taught me early that appearances could be deceiving, especially when it came to my own family. From the outside, the Henderson household looked like the perfect American success story. My parents, Carol and Frank, owned Henderson Home Solutions, a residential renovation company that had built a solid reputation throughout the greater Phoenix area. They specialized in kitchen remodels and bathroom renovations, projects that brought steady income and kept them connected to the community's middle and upper middle class neighborhoods. Our ranch-style home in Ahwatukee sat on a corner lot with a beautifully maintained desert landscape that Mom took pride in showing off to neighbors and clients alike. Dad's work truck, emblazoned with the company logo, was always parked in the driveway alongside Mom's white BMW SUV, a purchase she justified as necessary for meeting clients at their upscale properties. To anyone driving by, we embodied the American dream of hard work paying off in tangible success. The reality inside our four walls told a completely different story, one I didn't fully understand until I was well into my 20s. While Henderson Home Solutions generated decent revenue, my parents had a fundamental problem with financial discipline that would eventually reshape my entire relationship with money and family obligation. They operated under the dangerous assumption that good months would always compensate for lean periods, leading them to make financial decisions based on projected income rather than actual cash flow. This mindset extended far beyond business operations into every aspect of our personal lives. When business was good, nothing was too expensive. Dad would upgrade to the latest power tools even when his current equipment functioned perfectly. Mom would redecorate entire rooms on impulse, often hiring other contractors to do work that Dad could have completed himself. They justified these splurges as necessary investments in their image, claiming that successful business owners needed to look the part to attract quality clients. The contradiction was staggering. While preaching the importance of hard work and financial responsibility to their children, they consistently demonstrated the opposite through their actions. Credit cards weren't just payment methods in our household, they were treated like magical resources that somehow provided money without consequence. The concept of living below their means seemed foreign to them, despite having grown up in families where every dollar was carefully managed. My younger siblings, Tyler and Madison, absorbed these lessons differently than I did. Tyler, now 26, embraced the family's attitude toward money with enthusiasm that bordered on recklessness. Even as a teenager, he expected expensive gifts and experiences without considering their cost or impact on family finances. Madison, 23 and the youngest, developed an even more entitled relationship with money, viewing it as something that should flow freely to support her lifestyle choices without any reciprocal responsibility on her part. As the eldest child, I somehow became the family's unofficial financial backup plan, though this role was never explicitly defined or discussed. It started innocuously enough, during high school when I began working part-time at a local coffee shop. The money I earned was initially mine to spend on typical teenage wants like clothes, movies, and gas for the used Honda Civic I had purchased with my own savings. The first request for financial help came during my junior year when Dad's truck needed major transmission repairs. Business had been slow that month, and the repair estimate of $1,200 threatened to derail several upcoming projects. Rather than adjusting their lifestyle or dipping into business reserves, my parents approached me with what they framed as a temporary loan request. They needed $800 to cover part of the repair cost, promising to repay me within 2 weeks when a large project payment was due. That initial loan taught me several important lessons, though I wouldn't recognize their significance until years later. First, my parents were surprisingly comfortable asking their teenage daughter to cover adult responsibilities. Second, their definition of temporary was extremely flexible, stretching 2 weeks into 2 months before partial repayment began. Third, my willingness to help established a precedent that would define our relationship for the next decade. The requests became more frequent throughout my senior year of high school. Tyler needed money for a class trip that mom and dad couldn't afford but deemed essential for his social development. Madison required funding for dance costumes and competition fees that somehow hadn't been budgeted despite her involvement in dance for several years. Each request came with emotional appeals about family loyalty and temporary financial hardship that would be resolved soon. College presented new challenges and opportunities for financial manipulation. I had earned partial academic scholarships that covered roughly 60% of my tuition at Arizona State University, leaving a significant gap that needed to be filled through a combination of student loans, part-time work, and family contribution. My parents' contribution was sporadic at best, appearing when business was good and disappearing entirely during slow periods. To maintain my grades while covering living expenses, I worked nearly 30 hours per week at various campus jobs. I delivered food for a local restaurant, worked shifts at the university bookstore, and tutored high school students in mathematics. The schedule was exhausting, but it provided enough income.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
To cover rent, food, and other necessities while keeping my student loan debt manageable. Despite my full course load and work commitments, the requests from home continued with increasing frequency and urgency. Dad's business expenses seemed to expand constantly, always requiring immediate cash infusions to prevent disasters. Mom's decorating projects grew more elaborate, justified as necessary improvements that would somehow generate future income. Tyler's college expenses at a more expensive private university consistently exceeded budget projections. Madison's needs were perhaps the most frustrating because they often involved lifestyle choices rather than genuine necessities. She developed expensive tastes in clothing, cosmetics, and entertainment that exceeded what most college students could afford. Rather than adjusting her expectations or finding part-time work, she would call me in tears about needing money for sorority events, spring break trips, or designer items that she claimed were essential for maintaining her social status. The emotional manipulation tactics became increasingly sophisticated over time. Simple requests for loans evolved into complex narratives about family obligation and shared responsibility. My parents would frame their financial struggles as temporary setbacks that successful families weather together, positioning my contributions as investments in collective family success rather than bailouts for poor financial decisions. They developed a particularly effective strategy of linking money requests to family milestones and emotional events. Tyler's graduation gift became partially my responsibility when business revenues fell short of projections. Madison's birthday celebration required my financial participation to meet family standards. Christmas and other holidays became elaborate productions that somehow required my income contribution to maintain family traditions. The most insidious aspect of this dynamic was how it was presented as normal and expected rather than exceptional. My parents never seemed to consider that asking their college-age daughter to regularly contribute hundreds or thousands of dollars to family expenses was unusual. They treated my income as a household resource available for allocation according to family priorities, with my personal financial goals ranking considerably lower than collective family needs. After graduating with a degree in marketing and communications, I was fortunate to land a position as a marketing coordinator at a growing tech startup in Scottsdale. The salary was modest but represented the first stable income I had ever earned, along with benefits and opportunities for advancement that seemed promising. For the first time in my adult life, I had the prospect of building personal savings and financial independence. The transition from college to full-time employment should have marked my graduation from family financial obligation, but the opposite occurred. My steady paycheck made me a more reliable source of emergency funding, and the requests escalated accordingly. Business equipment failures required immediate cash, home repairs couldn't wait for business income. Tyler's car payments became sporadic, requiring my intervention to prevent repossession. Within 6 months of starting my new job, I was contributing more money to family expenses than I was saving for my own future. The cycle was exhausting and demoralizing, but breaking free seemed impossible without damaging relationships that I valued despite their dysfunction. My parents had successfully created a system where saying no to financial requests felt like abandoning family during times of need. The breaking point began building during a particularly difficult period when Dad's business faced several simultaneous challenges. A major project had been delayed due to permit issues, creating a cash flow crisis just as several large bills came due. Rather than scaling back expenses or seeking business loans, my parents immediately turned to me for assistance with what they described as a temporary shortfall. The amount they needed was staggering, nearly $4,000 to cover business expenses, mortgage payments, and credit card minimums. This represented more than my entire monthly take-home pay, requiring me to drain my emergency savings and delay plans to move into a better apartment. The request came with emotional appeals about family business survival and implications that my refusal could result in serious consequences for everyone. Against my better judgment, I provided the money with clear agreements about repayment timeline and future boundaries around financial requests. These agreements were immediately forgotten as soon as the crisis passed, and within weeks, new requests began arriving with the same urgency and emotional manipulation that had characterized previous appeals for help. It was during this period that Mom suggested adding me as an authorized user to her credit card account, ostensibly to help me build additional credit history. The real motivation became clear when she asked me to add her as an authorized user on my credit card account in return, framing it as a mutual arrangement that would provide both of us with emergency access to credit resources. The credit limit on my card was $15,000, representing the highest limit I had ever qualified for based on my employment history and good payment record. I was proud of reaching this milestone and viewed it as evidence of growing financial stability. Mom's request made me uncomfortable, but her explanation seemed reasonable on the surface. She only wanted access for genuine emergencies, and having mutual authorized user status would strengthen both our credit profiles. Within 3 months of gaining access to my credit card, the account balance had grown to over $6,000 in charges that I didn't recognize. Restaurant meals at expensive establishments I had never visited, shopping purchases from stores I didn't frequent, hotel charges from weekend trips I hadn't taken. When I confronted Mom about these charges, her response revealed the depth of entitlement that had developed around my financial resources. She seemed genuinely surprised by my concern, explaining that she had only used the card for family expenses that would benefit everyone in the long run. The restaurant meals were business dinners with potential clients. The shopping purchases included gifts for family occasions. The hotel charges were for a weekend getaway that Dad needed to relieve work stress. In her mind, these weren't unauthorized charges but rather family expenses that I should be happy to support. The conversation that followed was my first clear glimpse into how fundamentally different our perspectives on money and family obligation had become. My parents viewed my income and credit as family resources, subject to collective decision-making, while I had begun to see them as personal assets that I should control independently. This disconnect would soon explode into the crisis that would permanently reshape our family relationships. The discovery that would change everything came on a Tuesday evening in March when I received an email notification about a large pending charge on my credit card. The amount was so substantial that I initially assumed it was a mistake or fraudulent activity. $18,000 had been charged to a luxury resort booking agency, representing the largest single transaction in my credit history. I immediately called the credit card company to report what I assumed was fraud, but the customer service representative confirmed that the charge had been processed using my card information with additional verification that suggested legitimate use by an authorized user. The booking was for a 7-day stay at an exclusive resort in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, scheduled for the following month. The reservation included oceanfront suites, premium meal packages, spa treatments, and various recreational activities for 4 guests. My initial confusion gave way to growing horror as I realized what had happened. My family had planned an elaborate vacation using my credit card without my knowledge or permission, and the scope of their plans revealed a level of entitlement that I had never fully recognized. This wasn't a small emergency expense or temporary loan request. This was an $18,000 luxury vacation that they had booked using my financial resources, while presumably having no intention of including me in the travel plans. The phone call I made to Mom that evening will remain burned in my memory as the moment when years of financial manipulation finally came into sharp focus. Her response to my discovery was not embarrassment or apology, but rather enthusiastic excitement about the surprise family vacation she had arranged. The fact that she had used my credit card without permission seemed irrelevant to her, overshadowed by pride in having secured such an excellent deal on luxury accommodations. When I asked whether I was included in this family vacation, her pause and subsequent explanation revealed the true nature of how she viewed my role in family finances. She had assumed I would be too busy with work to take time off for vacation, so she had planned the trip for the 4 of them, my parents, Tyler, and Madison. My contribution would be financial rather than participatory, allowing me to help provide a wonderful experience for my family without the inconvenience of actually attending. The audacity of this arrangement left me temporarily speechless. My family had spent $18,000 of my money on a luxury vacation that I wasn't invited to attend, and they seemed to view this as a reasonable and thoughtful plan. The conversation ended with Mom expressing confusion about my negative reaction, suggesting that I think about it overnight and call her back when I was feeling more reasonable about the generous gift I was providing to the family. That night marked the end of my willingness to enable the financial dysfunction that had defined our family relationships for over a decade. I had reached a breaking point that demanded action rather than continued compliance. The plan I developed over the following days would finally establish the boundaries that I should have set years earlier, regardless of the consequences for family harmony. The morning after discovering the $18,000 vacation charge, I woke with a clarity that had been building for months but had finally crystallized into actionable resolve. I called my credit card company at 8 in the morning and reported the card as compromised, citing unauthorized usage that I needed to dispute. The customer service representative was professional and efficient, immediately canceling the existing card and expediting a replacement with new numbers. The pending resort charges would be reversed within 3 to 5 business days, and my account would be monitored for any additional suspicious activity. What my family didn't understand was that I had been preparing for this moment longer than I realized. The previous year had been a journey of gradual awakening to the reality of my situation, helped significantly by conversations with colleagues at work who came from healthier family dynamics. When I mentioned casual details about family financial arrangements during lunch conversations, the shocked reactions from coworkers made me realize that my normal wasn't actually normal at all. My closest colleague Samantha had been particularly helpful in this process of recognition. She came from a family where financial boundaries were clearly established and respected, where adult children weren't expected to fund their parents' lifestyle choices or bail out siblings from poor decisions. When I described having to contribute thousands of dollars to family expenses while barely building my own savings, her response was immediate and unequivocal: that arrangement was exploitative and unsustainable. Samantha introduced me to the concept of financial boundaries within families, explaining how healthy relationships respect each person's autonomy over their own resources. She shared books about codependency and financial abuse that opened my eyes to patterns I had accepted as normal but were actually deeply dysfunctional. The reading was painful because it forced me to confront how thoroughly I had been manipulated and how complicit I had become in enabling behaviors that were harmful to everyone involved. The therapy sessions I began attending during this period proved invaluable for processing the complex emotions surrounding family financial dynamics. Dr. Martinez, a licensed clinical social worker who specialized in family systems and financial trauma, helped me understand that my parents' behavior represented a form of financial abuse that was often overlooked because it occurred within family relationships and was couched in language of love and obligation. Through therapy, I began to recognize the sophisticated manipulation tactics that had been employed to maintain my compliance with unreasonable financial demands. The emotional appeals to family loyalty, the crisis narratives that required immediate action, the guilt-inducing suggestions that my reluctance to help revealed character flaws, all of these were textbook examples of financial coercion designed to override my natural instincts for self-preservation and boundary setting. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that establishing financial boundaries wasn't cruel or selfish, but rather necessary for healthy adult relationships. She explained that enabling financial irresponsibility actually prevented family members from developing the skills and motivation needed for genuine independence. My constant bailouts had allowed my parents and siblings to avoid facing the consequences of their choices, thereby perpetuating cycles of dependency that ultimately served no one's best interests. The decision to cancel my credit card wasn't impulsive revenge, but rather the culmination of months of careful consideration about how to break patterns that had become increasingly destructive. I had tried setting verbal boundaries around financial requests, but these were consistently ignored or overcome through emotional manipulation. The vacation booking represented such an extreme violation of trust and autonomy that it demanded a response proportional to the offense. Understanding that my family would likely react with anger and escalating pressure tactics, I spent considerable time preparing emotionally and practically for the confrontation that would inevitably follow. I moved important documents to a secure location, changed passwords on financial accounts, and established clear scripts for conversations that would allow me to remain calm and focused regardless of how heated emotions might become. The revelation about my family's vacation plans had also forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about the broader pattern of exclusion that had characterized our relationships for years. While I was expected to financially support family activities and milestones, I was rarely included in the actual experiences that my money helped fund. Tyler's graduation celebration, Madison's sorority events, my parents' anniversary trips, all of these occasions had required my financial contribution but hadn't included my actual presence or participation. This pattern of exclusion extended beyond financial matters into emotional and social dynamics within the family. Despite being the eldest child and arguably the most financially stable family member, my opinions and preferences were rarely considered when important decisions were made. Family gatherings often felt like performances where I was expected to smile and express gratitude for being allowed to contribute to everyone else's happiness, while my own needs and boundaries were consistently dismissed. The vacation booking crystallized all of these issues into one unmistakable example of how my family viewed my role in their lives. I was valued as a financial resource, but not as a person whose presence would enhance their vacation experience. The assumption that I would be happy to fund an $18,000 trip that I wasn't invited to attend revealed a level of entitlement and disconnection that could no longer be ignored or excused. My decision to cancel the credit card was motivated not just by anger but by a recognition that continuing to enable this dynamic would ultimately destroy any possibility of genuine relationships based on mutual respect and consideration. If my family could only value me for my financial contributions, then removing those contributions would reveal whether any authentic affection or interest in my well-being actually existed beneath the transactional dynamics that had defined our interactions for so long. The 3 days between canceling the credit card and my family's inevitable discovery of the problem were both peaceful and anxious. I continued my normal work routine while mentally preparing for the storm that was approaching. I practiced conversations with Dr. Martinez during an emergency therapy session, role-playing various scenarios and developing strategies for maintaining emotional equilibrium regardless of how intense the confrontation might become. During this waiting period, I also took practical steps to protect myself from potential retaliation or escalation. I informed my apartment building's management about possible unwanted visitors and changed the emergency contact information on all my accounts to remove family members who might attempt to interfere with my financial decisions. These precautions felt dramatic but necessary given the intensity of my family's reactions to previous attempts at boundary setting. The isolation during these 3 days also provided valuable perspective on how much mental and emotional energy I had been devoting to managing family financial crises. Without constant worry about the next emergency request or guilt-inducing phone call, I experienced a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in years. This glimpse of what life could be like without constant financial manipulation strengthened my resolve to maintain whatever boundaries would be necessary to preserve this peace. My relationship with money had been so thoroughly entangled with family dynamics that I had never developed a clear sense of my own financial goals and priorities. The therapy sessions helped me recognize that my reluctance to spend money on myself, even for basic comforts and necessities, stemmed from years of being taught that my resources belonged to the family collective rather than to me personally. This realization was both liberating and frightening, as it meant relearning fundamental concepts about financial autonomy and self-care. The weekend before the vacation booking was discovered, I spent time envisioning what my life could look like with healthy financial boundaries in place. I researched apartment options that would represent an upgrade from my current living situation. I explored vacation destinations that I might visit using my own money for my own enjoyment. I considered educational opportunities and career investments that had been impossible while most of my income was diverted to family expenses. These exercises in imagination revealed how thoroughly the financial exploitation had limited my own growth and development. I had been so focused on meeting everyone else's needs that I had never seriously considered what I might want for my own future. The prospect of reclaiming control over my financial resources opened possibilities that felt both exciting and overwhelming after years of restriction and obligation. As Tuesday evening approached and the vacation booking discovery loomed, I felt a combination of dread and anticipation about the conversation that would fundamentally alter my family relationships. There was no possibility of returning to the previous dynamic once this boundary was established. Either my family would learn to respect my autonomy and develop healthier financial habits, or our relationships would be permanently damaged by their inability to accept new terms of engagement. The conversation with Mom revealed exactly how deep the entitlement and disconnection had become. Her genuine confusion about my negative reaction to funding a vacation I wasn't invited to attend demonstrated that she had completely lost sight of me as an individual with my own needs, preferences, and boundaries. In her mind, I existed primarily as a financial resource whose value was measured by my willingness to contribute to family goals without expecting reciprocal consideration or inclusion. Her suggestion that I think about it overnight and call back when I was feeling more reasonable perfectly illustrated the manipulative framework that had governed our interactions for years. My emotional reactions to boundary violations were consistently framed as unreasonable or temporary states that would resolve once I remembered my family obligations. The assumption that reflection would lead me to embrace funding an $18,000 vacation I wasn't invited to attend revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of both my character and the nature of healthy relationships. That night, I made lists of all the financial contributions I had made to family expenses over the previous 5 years, calculating amounts that totaled well over $50,000 when emergency loans, credit card payments, and direct financial gifts were combined. This exercise wasn't intended to create ammunition for future arguments, but rather to provide concrete evidence of the scope of financial exploitation that had occurred and to reinforce my resolve to establish different boundaries going forward. The documentation process also revealed patterns that I hadn't fully recognized while living through them. Financial requests consistently coincided with my own major life transitions or achievements, suggesting that my growing independence and success triggered increased attempts to maintain financial control. The timing wasn't coincidental but rather reflected a systematic effort to prevent me from building the stability and autonomy that would eventually threaten the existing dynamic. Understanding these patterns helped me prepare for the manipulation tactics that would inevitably be employed to restore the previous arrangement. Appeals to family loyalty, threats of relationship damage, claims about temporary financial hardship requiring emergency assistance, all of these strategies had been effective in the past and would certainly be attempted again with increased intensity. My advantage lay in recognizing these tactics as manipulation rather than genuine expressions of need or affection. The evening before the vacation booking would be discovered, I wrote a letter to myself outlining my reasons for establishing financial boundaries and my commitment to maintaining them regardless of emotional pressure or relationship consequences. This letter would serve as a reminder during difficult moments when guilt and manipulation might weaken my resolve. The exercise of articulating my motivations in writing also provided clarity about what I hoped to achieve through this confrontation and what outcomes I was prepared to accept. My goals weren't punitive or designed to hurt anyone, but rather focused on creating space for authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial exploitation. I hoped that establishing clear boundaries would eventually lead to healthier dynamics where family members valued each other for personal qualities rather than financial contributions. However, I was also prepared for the possibility that some relationships might not survive the transition to more equitable terms of engagement. The letter to myself also included reminders about my own worth and value beyond my financial contributions. Years of being valued primarily as a resource had eroded my confidence in other aspects of my character and achievements. The boundary-setting process was as much about reclaiming my identity as an individual as it was about protecting my financial resources from continued exploitation. Wednesday morning arrived with the strange calm that often precedes significant confrontations. I went to work as usual, but my attention was divided between professional responsibilities and anticipation of the phone call that would inevitably come once my family attempted to finalize their vacation preparations. The waiting was almost more difficult than the actual confrontation would be, filled with anxiety about unknown variables and potential outcomes. The call came at 2:30 in the afternoon while I was in a team meeting about an upcoming product launch. I stepped out to take it, recognizing Mom's number and knowing that the moment of truth had finally arrived. Her voice was strained and panicked in a way that I had heard many times before during financial crises, but this time I felt detached rather than immediately concerned about solving whatever problem had emerged. The conversation that followed would mark the beginning of a new chapter in our family relationships, one where my needs and boundaries would finally be respected, or where I would learn definitively that authentic relationships with my family members weren't possible under any circumstances. Either outcome represented progress from the exploitative dynamic that had defined our interactions for over a decade, even if one possibility involved significant grief and loss. The resort booking agency had attempted to process additional charges for resort activities and upgrades, triggering the discovery that the original payment method was no longer valid. Mom's initial assumption was that there had been some kind of banking error or fraud alert that could be quickly resolved with a phone call to customer service. Her growing panic as she realized the scope of the problem reflected the depth of her investment in the vacation plans and the extent to which she had counted on my financial resources to make them possible. When I calmly explained that I had canceled the credit card deliberately after discovering the unauthorized charges, the silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. I could hear her processing this information and beginning to understand that the problem couldn't be solved with explanations or emotional appeals. The vacation she had planned and the financial arrangement she had assumed would continue had been permanently disrupted by my decision to establish boundaries that she hadn't anticipated or prepared for. The explosion of anger and accusations that followed was intense but not surprising given the stakes involved and the investment she had made in maintaining the existing dynamic. Every manipulation tactic that had been effective in the past was deployed with increased intensity, from appeals to family loyalty to threats about relationship consequences to claims about the devastating impact my decision would have on everyone's happiness and financial security. Throughout this barrage of emotional manipulation, I maintained the calm and measured responses that Dr. Martinez and I had practiced during therapy sessions. I acknowledged her feelings without accepting responsibility for them, expressed empathy for the disappointment without agreeing to resolve it through financial sacrifice, and restated my boundaries clearly without becoming defensive or angry in return. This approach seemed to frustrate her more than direct confrontation might have, as it provided no emotional leverage for escalating the manipulation. The conversation ended with her demand that I fix the situation immediately, followed by her abrupt disconnection when I calmly refused and suggested that they would need to find alternative funding for their vacation plans. The click of the phone hanging up marked the end of an era in our family relationships and the beginning of whatever would come next, whether that involved growth toward healthier dynamics or permanent estrangement from family members who couldn't accept new terms of engagement. In the hours that followed, I experienced a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and anxiety about what the future might hold. The immediate crisis was resolved in the sense that my financial boundaries had been established and communicated clearly. However, the broader challenge of rebuilding family relationships on healthier foundations was just beginning, with no guarantee that all family members would be willing or able to participate in that process. The evening brought additional phone calls from Tyler and Madison, each attempting different approaches to convince me to restore the vacation funding. Tyler's approach was more direct and confrontational, expressing anger about the disruption to plans that everyone had been looking forward to and challenging my right to make decisions that affected the entire family. Madison's strategy relied more heavily on emotional manipulation, crying about disappointment and pleading for understanding about how much the vacation meant to everyone's happiness and family bonding. Neither conversation resulted in any wavering of my position, but both provided additional evidence of how thoroughly the financial exploitation had been normalized within our family system. Neither sibling questioned the appropriateness of using my credit card without permission for an $18,000 vacation that I wasn't invited to attend. Their focus was entirely on my obligation to solve the problem they were experiencing, with no acknowledgement of the boundary violation that had created the situation in the first place. These conversations reinforced my understanding that the problem extended beyond my parents to include siblings who had learned to view my financial resources as family assets available for their use and enjoyment. The pattern of entitlement and exploitation had become so deeply embedded in our family culture that everyone participated in maintaining it, making change more challenging but also more necessary for any hope of future healthy relationships. The decision to maintain my boundaries despite intense emotional pressure from multiple family members represented a fundamental shift in how I understood my role within the family and my responsibility for other people's choices and consequences. For the first time in my adult life, I was prioritizing my own well-being and financial security over the comfort and convenience of family members who had consistently demonstrated that they valued me primarily for what I could provide rather than for who I was as a person. The Thursday morning that followed the explosive phone conversations brought an unexpected sense of lightness that I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since starting my career, I woke up without the underlying anxiety about what financial emergency might be waiting in my voicemail or text messages. The constant vigilance that had become second nature, the automatic mental calculations about how much money I could spare for the next family crisis, all of that mental noise had suddenly gone quiet. At work, my colleagues noticed an immediate change in my demeanor. Samantha commented during our morning coffee that I seemed more relaxed and present than she had seen me in months. When I explained what had transpired with the vacation booking and credit card cancellation, her reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. She had watched me struggle with family financial demands for the entire time we had worked together, and she expressed genuine admiration for my decision to finally establish firm boundaries. The conversation with Samantha revealed how obvious the dysfunction had been to outside observers, even when I had been too close to the situation to recognize its severity. She mentioned specific instances where I had seemed stressed about money despite having a good salary, times when I had declined social invitations because I couldn't afford them despite having no major personal expenses, and occasions when I had mentioned family financial obligations that struck her as inappropriate and unsustainable. Her perspective helped me understand that the isolation and stress I had been experiencing weren't normal byproducts of family closeness, but rather symptoms of an exploitative relationship that had been slowly eroding my mental health and financial stability. The validation from someone whose judgment I trusted reinforced my conviction that the boundary setting was necessary and overdue, regardless of the family turmoil it might create. The workday provided welcome distraction from family drama, but the peace was temporary. By early afternoon, my phone began buzzing with text messages from Dad, who had apparently been recruited to apply different pressure tactics than Mom had attempted. His messages were more business-oriented, framing the vacation situation as a financial opportunity that I was foolishly squandering rather than an emotional or family obligation. Dad's approach revealed another layer of the manipulation that had been operating within our family system. Where Mom focused on emotional appeals and guilt, Dad positioned himself as the pragmatic voice of reason, explaining complex financial justifications for why my contributions were actually beneficial to my own interests. According to his logic, funding family experiences and business expenses represented investments in collective family success that would eventually benefit me through increased stability and shared prosperity. The text messages escalated throughout the afternoon, with Dad explaining that the vacation booking represented a significant discount that wouldn't be available again, making my refusal to restore the funding financially irrational. He calculated the per-person cost and compared it to what I might spend on my own vacation, arguing that I was getting exceptional value for my contribution even without attending the trip personally. The mathematical gymnastics required to frame an $18,000 vacation I wasn't invited to as a good deal for me demonstrated the sophisticated rationalization skills that had enabled years of financial exploitation. When the text messages failed to generate the desired response, Dad escalated to phone calls that became increasingly aggressive as the day progressed. The conversations revealed his fundamental belief that my financial resources were properly subject to family decision-making, and that my attempt to maintain independent control represented selfishness and disloyalty. He seemed genuinely confused by my refusal to prioritize family happiness over personal financial security, as if this preference indicated a character flaw that needed correction. The most telling aspect of Dad's approach was his complete inability to acknowledge the appropriateness of my anger about the unauthorized credit card usage. In his mind, the family's financial needs justified any means of accessing resources, including using my credit without permission. He seemed to view my outrage as an overreaction to a minor procedural issue, rather than a legitimate response to a serious violation of trust and autonomy. These conversations forced me to confront how thoroughly my parents had convinced themselves that their behavior was reasonable and justified. This wasn't a case of people who knew they were being manipulative and chose to continue anyway, but rather individuals who had constructed elaborate belief systems that framed exploitation as love and boundary violations as family cooperation. The depth of their self-deception made meaningful change seem even more unlikely, as they couldn't acknowledge problems they genuinely didn't believe existed. By Thursday evening, the family pressure campaign had expanded to include extended relatives who had been recruited to provide additional emotional leverage. Aunt Linda, Dad's sister, called to express concern about the family conflict and to suggest that I was allowing pride to interfere with family harmony. Her call revealed that my parents had shared their version of events with extended family, positioning themselves as victims of my unreasonable behavior rather than acknowledging their role in creating the crisis. The conversation with Aunt Linda was particularly frustrating because she had always maintained a reputation as the sensible, level-headed member of the extended family. Her willingness to pressure me without first seeking to understand my perspective demonstrated how effectively my parents had controlled the narrative and garnered sympathy for their position. The realization that extended family members were being manipulated into supporting behavior they probably wouldn't endorse if they understood the full situation added another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. Throughout these conversations, I maintained the scripts that Dr. Martinez and I had developed for managing manipulation attempts. I acknowledged feelings without accepting responsibility for them, restated my position calmly without becoming defensive, and refused to engage with emotional blackmail regardless of how intense the pressure became. This approach seemed to frustrate callers who were expecting more dramatic reactions that could be used to portray me as unreasonable or emotionally unstable. The weekend brought a temporary reprieve from phone calls, but social media provided new avenues for family pressure. Madison posted cryptic messages about family loyalty and disappointment that were clearly designed to generate sympathy and indirect pressure for me to restore the vacation funding. Tyler shared motivational quotes about forgiveness and family unity that seemed targeted at our current conflict. These passive-aggressive tactics were more subtle than direct confrontation but equally manipulative in their attempt to create social pressure for compliance. The social media campaign also revealed how thoroughly my family members had absorbed the victim narrative that positioned them as wronged parties rather than individuals facing consequences for inappropriate behavior. The post generated supportive comments from friends who didn't understand the full context, creating an echo chamber that reinforced their sense of righteousness and grievance. This external validation made them more resistant to acknowledging their role in creating the crisis and less likely to consider changing their approach. Friday afternoon brought the most disturbing escalation yet when Mom appeared at my workplace without warning, demanding to speak with me about resolving the vacation situation. Her presence in my professional environment represented a boundary violation that felt more threatening than the previous phone calls and text messages. The attempt to pressure me in a setting where I couldn't easily disengage or respond freely demonstrated a willingness to escalate the conflict in ways that could potentially damage my career and professional reputation. The conversation that took place in the parking lot outside my office building was the most direct confrontation we had experienced since the crisis began. Without the buffer of phone communication, Mom's anger and desperation were more visible and intense. She alternated between tearful pleas about family relationships and angry accusations about my selfishness and ingratitude. The emotional volatility on display reinforced my conviction that healthy boundaries were necessary to protect myself from psychological manipulation that was becoming increasingly aggressive. Most significantly, Mom's surprise appearance at my workplace revealed the extent to which she was willing to intrude into areas of my life that should have been protected from family drama. The fact that she felt entitled to confront me at my job demonstrated a complete disregard for appropriate boundaries and a willingness to cause professional embarrassment to achieve her goals. This escalation made it clear that verbal boundaries alone would be insufficient to protect myself from continued harassment and manipulation. The conversation ended with Mom's ultimatum that I had until Sunday evening to restore the vacation funding or face permanent damage to our family relationships. The threat was delivered with such conviction that I understood she genuinely believed she had the moral authority to dictate terms and deadlines for my compliance. Her confidence in this approach suggested that similar ultimatums had been effective in the past, probably during previous boundary-setting attempts that I had eventually abandoned under pressure. That evening, I had an emergency session with Dr. Martinez to process the workplace confrontation and develop strategies for managing the escalating harassment. She helped me understand that the escalation was actually a positive sign, indicating that my boundary setting was effective enough to disrupt established patterns and force family members to reveal the true intensity of their investment in maintaining control. The increasingly desperate tactics suggested that they recognized the threat to their access to my resources and were willing to employ more extreme measures to restore the previous dynamic. Dr. Martinez also helped me prepare for the possibility that the harassment might continue to escalate in ways that could require legal intervention. We discussed documentation strategies for recording threats and boundary violations, identified resources for obtaining restraining orders if necessary, and developed safety plans for protecting myself from potential retaliation. These preparations felt extreme but necessary given the intensity of the reaction to my boundary setting and the clear willingness to violate professional and personal boundaries to achieve compliance. The weekend passed in relative quiet, which felt ominous rather than peaceful given the ultimatum that was scheduled to expire Sunday evening. I spent time with friends who had been supportive throughout the crisis, engaging in normal social activities that reminded me what life could be like without constant family drama and financial manipulation. These experiences reinforced my motivation to maintain the boundaries I had established regardless of what consequences Sunday evening might bring. Saturday evening brought an unexpected text from Tyler that was markedly different in tone from his previous communications. Instead of anger or manipulation, the message expressed genuine curiosity about my perspective and willingness to have a conversation without predetermined agenda or demands. This shift was surprising enough that I agreed to meet him for coffee Sunday afternoon, hoping that at least one family member might be capable of engaging with the situation from a more mature and understanding perspective. The conversation with Tyler proved to be the first genuinely productive family interaction since the crisis began. He had apparently spent time reflecting on the situation and had begun to recognize some of the problematic patterns that had characterized our family's financial dynamics. While he didn't fully understand or accept my position, he demonstrated willingness to listen without immediately dismissing my concerns or attempting to pressure me into changing my decision. Tyler's evolving perspective provided insight into how the financial exploitation had affected him as well, though in different ways than it had affected me. He had learned to expect financial support without considering the burden it placed on me, but he had also developed an unhealthy dependence on external funding that prevented him from developing proper money management skills and personal responsibility. The conversation helped him recognize that continuing the existing dynamic might actually be harmful to his own growth and development, even though it provided short-term convenience. The Sunday afternoon coffee meeting extended into a longer conversation about family dynamics, personal responsibility, and the possibility of healthier relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial obligation. While Tyler wasn't ready to fully support my position, he expressed understanding of my frustration and acknowledged that some changes to our family's financial arrangements might be beneficial for everyone involved. This represented more progress than I had expected and provided hope that at least some family relationships might survive the transition to healthier boundaries. However, the conversation also revealed the depth of conditioning that would need to be overcome for meaningful change to occur. Tyler's understanding of my perspective was intellectual rather than emotional, and he continued to view the vacation funding as separate from broader patterns of financial exploitation. He could acknowledge that using my credit card without permission was inappropriate while still believing that I should restore the funding to avoid disappointing everyone who had been looking forward to the trip. Sunday evening arrived with a mix of anxiety and resolve about whatever consequences Mom's ultimatum might bring. I had prepared for various scenarios from increased harassment to complete family estrangement and had developed strategies for managing each possibility. The most important preparation was emotional, accepting that maintaining healthy boundaries was worth whatever relationship costs might result and that I couldn't control other people's reactions to my decision to prioritize my own well-being. The promised Sunday evening confrontation never materialized in the direct form I had anticipated. Instead of phone calls or dramatic gestures, the evening passed in silence that felt heavier and more significant than any verbal communication could have been. The absence of contact suggested that my family was either regrouping for different tactics or beginning to accept that their previous approaches had been unsuccessful in restoring the vacation funding. Monday morning brought the first clear indication of how the family had decided to respond to my boundary setting. Instead of continued direct pressure, they had apparently chosen a strategy of social isolation designed to demonstrate the relationship consequences of my refusal to comply with their financial demands. Group text messages that had previously included me were now sent without my participation. Family event planning proceeded without my input or invitation. Social media posts about family activities pointedly excluded any mention of me. This silent treatment was more sophisticated than previous manipulation attempts because it required no direct communication that could be documented or challenged. The message was clear without being explicitly stated: compliance with financial demands was the price of family inclusion, and refusal to fund their lifestyle would result in social and emotional exile. The strategy was designed to create loneliness and isolation that would eventually motivate me to restore the previous dynamic to regain family acceptance. The social isolation campaign had immediate emotional impact because it confirmed my worst fears about the conditional nature of family love and acceptance. The speed with which I was excluded from family communications and activities after refusing to fund a vacation I wasn't invited to attend revealed how thoroughly my relationships had been based on financial utility rather than genuine affection or interest in my well-being as a person. However, the isolation also provided unexpected relief from constant pressure and manipulation that had become so normalized I hadn't fully recognized its toll on my mental and emotional health. The absence of daily crisis calls, guilt-inducing text messages, and demands for financial contributions created space for me to reconnect with my own interests, goals, and relationships outside the family system. This breathing room was essential for maintaining perspective about the appropriateness of my boundary setting and the necessity of protecting my financial and emotional resources. The week that followed brought increasing clarity about the true nature of my family relationships and the prospects for meaningful change or reconciliation. The complete silence from parents and siblings who had previously contacted me multiple times daily demonstrated that their investment in me as a person was minimal compared to their investment in me as a financial resource. This realization was painful but also liberating, as it freed me from the obligation to maintain relationships that could become entirely transactional and exploitative. By the end of the week, the vacation booking deadline had passed without resolution, presumably resulting in the loss of deposits and the cancellation of the elaborate plans that had been made using my credit card. The absence of angry phone calls or dramatic confrontations about this outcome suggested that my family had finally begun to accept that their previous tactics were ineffective and that new approaches would be required if they wanted to restore any kind of relationship with me. The silence created space for me to process the complex emotions surrounding the loss of family relationships that had been central to my identity despite their dysfunction. Grief about the end of childhood fantasies about family love and acceptance mixed with relief about freedom from financial exploitation and emotional manipulation. The complexity of these feelings required ongoing therapy and support from friends who could provide perspective without attempting to pressure me toward premature reconciliation or forgiveness. Most importantly, the week of silence allowed me to begin imagining what my life could look like with the financial and emotional resources that had previously been diverted to family management. The money that had been constantly drained by family emergencies could now be directed toward personal goals and experiences that had been postponed indefinitely. The mental energy that had been consumed by family crisis management could be redirected toward career development, relationship building, and personal growth that had been neglected for years. 2 weeks into the silent treatment, an unexpected development shattered the carefully maintained distance my family had established. Dad's business partner, Mike Rodriguez, called me directly with information that changed my understanding of the entire situation. Mike had known me since childhood and had always maintained a friendly relationship independent of family dynamics. His call revealed that the vacation crisis was more complex than I had realized, and that my parents had been hiding significant financial problems that extended far beyond the resort booking. Mike explained that Henderson Home Solutions was facing serious cash flow problems that threatened the survival of the business. Several major clients had delayed payments on completed projects, creating a domino effect that left the company unable to meet payroll and supplier obligations. The elaborate vacation plans hadn't been funded from business profits or personal savings, but rather represented a desperate attempt to maintain appearances while the family's financial foundation crumbled beneath them. According to Mike, my parents had been using credit advances and personal loans to keep the business operating for several months, accumulating debt that now exceeded their ability to service without dramatic intervention. The vacation booking had been financed through my credit card because all of their other financial resources had been exhausted or committed to business obligations. My refusal to fund the trip hadn't just disrupted leisure plans but had also exposed the broader financial crisis that they had been concealing from everyone, including their business partner. This revelation reframed the entire conflict in ways that were both illuminating and disturbing. The escalating pressure tactics and emotional manipulation hadn't just been about maintaining access to my financial resources for discretionary spending, but rather about preventing the exposure of financial mismanagement that could result in business failure, bankruptcy, and social embarrassment. The stakes were much higher than I had understood, which explained the intensity of their reaction to my boundary setting. Mike's information also revealed that my financial contributions over the years hadn't been supporting the family lifestyle I had assumed, but rather had been subsidizing a failing business that my parents had been unwilling to acknowledge or address appropriately. The emergency loans for business equipment, the crisis funding for unexpected expenses, the credit card charges for business dinners and client entertainment, all of these had been attempts to prop up an enterprise that was fundamentally unsustainable without continuous external financial support. The conversation with Mike forced me to confront uncomfortable questions about my own role in enabling the financial dysfunction that had now reached crisis proportions. My willingness to provide emergency funding without requiring detailed explanations or accountability measures had allowed my parents to avoid making difficult decisions about business operations, spending priorities, and lifestyle adjustments that might have prevented the current crisis from developing. However, Mike also emphasized that the business problems weren't caused by my recent boundary setting but rather by years of financial mismanagement that predated my involvement and would have eventually resulted in crisis regardless of my contributions. My money had temporarily delayed the inevitable reckoning but hadn't addressed the underlying problems that made the business unsustainable. The vacation booking fiasco had simply accelerated a timeline that was already moving toward financial collapse. Mike's call included a request that I consider meeting with my parents to discuss potential solutions that might save the business and preserve their livelihood. He acknowledged that my grievances about financial exploitation were legitimate and that my parents' approach to the vacation funding had been inappropriate. However, he also emphasized the human cost of business failure, including the impact on employees who depended on Henderson Home Solutions for their income and the broader community consequences of losing an established local business. The request placed me in an impossible position between protecting my own financial security and potentially preventing catastrophic consequences for people who weren't responsible for the family dysfunction that had created the crisis. The employees who might lose their jobs if the business failed hadn't participated in the financial exploitation I had experienced. The suppliers and subcontractors who might not be paid if the company collapsed weren't guilty of the manipulation and boundary violations that had prompted my decision to establish financial independence. After consulting with Dr. Martinez and several trusted friends, I agreed to attend one meeting with my parents and Mike to discuss the business situation with clear conditions about the scope and purpose of the conversation. I would listen to information about potential solutions, but I wouldn't commit to any financial contributions during the meeting itself. Any decisions about future involvement would be made independently after I had time to process the information and consider my options without pressure or manipulation. The meeting took place at Mike's office on a Thursday evening, providing neutral territory that reduced the likelihood of emotional manipulation tactics that might be more likely in family settings. My parents appeared more subdued and vulnerable than I had seen them since childhood, reflecting the stress of financial crisis and the recognition that their previous approaches to problem solving had been unsuccessful. The change in demeanor was striking enough to make me wonder whether genuine self-reflection might finally be occurring. Dad's presentation of the business financial situation was more honest and detailed than any previous conversation we had shared about money. He acknowledged that the company had been operating at a loss for nearly 2 years, sustained only through credit advances and personal loans that had now reached unsustainable levels. The vacation booking had represented an attempt to maintain family morale and public appearances during a period when private stress had become almost unbearable. Mom's contribution to the meeting focused on acknowledging the inappropriateness of using my credit card without permission and expressing regret about the way family financial arrangements had developed over time. While her apology felt somewhat scripted and strategic, it also included specific recognition of behavior patterns that she had previously defended or rationalized. The willingness to acknowledge wrongdoing represented more accountability than I had ever experienced from either parent. The business rescue plan they presented involved selling the family home to generate capital for debt reduction and operational funding, significantly downsizing personal expenses to match reduced income expectations, and restructuring the company's service offerings to focus on smaller, more profitable projects that could be completed with existing resources. The plan was realistic enough to be potentially viable, but it also required discipline and sacrifice that my parents had historically been unwilling to embrace. Most significantly, the rescue plan didn't include any requests for my financial contributions or ongoing support. Mike had apparently insisted that any viable solution needed to be based on resources that my parents could control independently without relying on external funding from family members or other sources that might be withdrawn if relationships deteriorated. This approach represented a fundamental shift from previous crisis management strategies that had always involved finding someone else to provide emergency funding. The meeting concluded with my agreement to consider the information they had presented and to respond within 1 week about whether I was willing to have any ongoing involvement in their financial recovery process. I made clear that any future relationship would need to be based on significantly different terms than our previous interactions, with explicit boundaries around financial obligations and clear accountability measures for any agreements we might reach. The week that followed was filled with intense reflection about forgiveness, family obligation, and the appropriate balance between self-protection and compassion for people who were facing genuine crisis. The financial problems were serious enough to threaten my parents' basic security and stability, making their previous desperation more understandable even if it didn't excuse the manipulative tactics they had employed. The human consequences of business failure extended beyond my family to include employees and community members who would be affected through no fault of their own. However, my primary obligation remained protecting my own financial and emotional well-being from relationships that had proven to be exploitative and harmful. The crisis that had prompted their current vulnerability was largely the result of choices they had made independently, including the decision to prioritize lifestyle maintenance over business sustainability and the choice to conceal financial problems rather than addressing them honestly when intervention might have been more effective. Dr. Martinez helped me process the complex emotions surrounding potential reconciliation with family members who had demonstrated limited capacity for respecting boundaries or acknowledging their impact on others. The crisis had created an opportunity for meaningful change in family dynamics, but it had also revealed the extent of financial mismanagement and emotional manipulation that would need to be addressed for any healthy relationship to be possible. After extensive consideration, I decided to offer limited support that would help my parents stabilize their situation without returning to the previous dynamic of unlimited financial availability. I agreed to provide a one-time loan of $5,000 to help with the most urgent business obligations with clear repayment terms and written documentation that would protect both parties. More importantly, I offered to help them connect with financial counseling services and business consultants who could provide ongoing guidance for sustainable recovery. The loan offer came with explicit conditions about future financial requests and family interactions. I would not provide additional funding beyond the specified amount, regardless of circumstances or emergencies that might arise. Family gatherings and communications would need to include me as an equal participant rather than positioning me as a financial resource for other people's plans and activities. Any manipulation tactics or boundary violations would result in immediate termination of contact without possibility of reconciliation. My parents' response to these terms revealed how much their perspective had shifted during the crisis period. They accepted the conditions without argument or attempts at negotiation, expressing genuine gratitude for the limited assistance and acknowledging that their previous expectations had been unreasonable and unsustainable. The change in attitude seemed authentic rather than strategic, suggesting that the financial crisis had prompted genuine self-reflection about family dynamics and personal responsibility. The months that followed brought gradual improvement in both business stability and family relationships, though progress was slow and required constant vigilance about boundary maintenance. My parents sold their house and moved into a smaller apartment, using the proceeds to reduce business debt and establish more sustainable operational funding. The downsizing was difficult emotionally but seemed to provide relief from the financial pressure that had been consuming their mental and emotional energy for years. Tyler and Madison's reactions to the family financial crisis revealed interesting differences in their character and maturity levels. Tyler initially struggled with the reduced family resources and expectations of personal financial responsibility, but gradually developed better money management skills and increased appreciation for the effort required to maintain financial stability. Madison was more resistant to change and continued seeking external funding for lifestyle expenses, though she learned to look beyond family sources when her requests were consistently declined. The new family dynamic wasn't perfect, but it was significantly healthier than the previous arrangement that had been based on financial exploitation and emotional manipulation. Family gatherings became less frequent but more genuine, focused on actual relationship building rather than crisis management or resource extraction. My parents developed greater respect for my autonomy and personal boundaries, while I gained confidence in my ability to maintain those boundaries even when faced with emotional pressure or crisis situations. The business recovery progressed steadily, though slowly, with Henderson Home Solutions eventually returning to modest profitability through more careful project selection and expense management. My parents learned to live within their actual means rather than relying on credit advances and family loans to maintain unsustainable lifestyle standards. The forced downsizing ultimately improved their financial discipline and reduced the stress that had been affecting their health and relationship quality. Most importantly, I learned that healthy boundaries could actually strengthen family relationships when they were respected and maintained consistently. The period of conflict and crisis had been difficult for everyone involved, but it had also created space for more authentic interactions based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. My willingness to prioritize my own well-being had ultimately benefited everyone by forcing necessary changes that wouldn't have occurred under the previous dynamic. The experience also provided valuable lessons about the difference between helping and enabling when it comes to family financial problems. My previous contributions had delayed necessary adjustments and decision-making that might have prevented the business crisis from reaching catastrophic proportions. The limited conditional assistance I eventually provided was more helpful precisely because it included accountability measures and clear boundaries that encouraged sustainable solutions. 2 years after the vacation booking crisis, our family relationships had stabilized into a new equilibrium that felt sustainable and respectful. My parents occasionally mentioned missing the financial cushion that my previous contributions had provided, but they also expressed appreciation for the independence and self-reliance they had developed through necessity. Tyler had found steady employment and was managing his own expenses responsibly. Madison was still learning financial discipline but was no longer expecting family bailouts for poor spending decisions. The transformation wasn't complete or perfect, but it represented genuine progress toward healthier family dynamics based on mutual respect rather than financial obligation. The crisis that had initially felt like relationship destruction had actually created space for more authentic connections that weren't contaminated by resentment about exploitation or anxiety about constant financial pressure. My own life improved dramatically with the establishment of clear financial boundaries and the resulting freedom to pursue personal goals that had been postponed indefinitely while family resources were being diverted to crisis management. I was able to move into a better apartment, take actual vacations that I planned and enjoyed myself, and begin building savings for long-term goals like homeownership and retirement that had seemed impossible under the previous arrangement. The therapy process continued to be valuable for processing complex emotions about family relationships and developing skills for maintaining healthy boundaries in other areas of life. Dr. Martinez helped me recognize that the patterns I had experienced with family financial dynamics could potentially emerge in romantic relationships, friendships, or professional settings if I didn't remain vigilant about protecting my autonomy and resources from exploitation. The entire experience reinforced my understanding that setting boundaries isn't selfish or cruel but rather necessary for maintaining relationships that are based on genuine mutual respect and care. People who truly value you as a person will respect your limits and work within them, while those who only value you for what you can provide will resist boundaries and attempt to restore exploitative dynamics through manipulation and pressure. Looking back on the vacation booking crisis that had seemed so devastating at the time, I recognized it as a catalyst for positive changes that might never have occurred without such a dramatic boundary violation. The $18,000 charge that had initially felt like the ultimate betrayal had actually provided the clarity and motivation needed to transform dysfunctional family relationships into healthier connections based on appropriate expectations and mutual consideration. The lessons learned through this experience extended far beyond family relationships to influence my approach to all personal and professional interactions. I developed greater confidence in my ability to recognize manipulation tactics and respond appropriately without being overwhelmed by guilt or pressure to prioritize other people's comfort over my own well-being. These skills proved valuable in numerous situations where boundary setting was necessary to maintain healthy relationships and personal integrity. Have you ever felt like your family's personal bank account constantly funding experiences and emergencies that somehow never include you in the actual benefits? Have you struggled with setting financial boundaries because family members make you feel guilty for prioritizing your own security and goals? The process of establishing healthy limits is never easy, especially when it involves people who have been central to your identity and support system throughout your life. The most important thing I learned is that authentic love and respect don't require financial sacrifice or constant availability for crisis management. People who genuinely care about your well-being will want you to succeed and thrive independently rather than viewing you as a resource to be managed and utilized for their benefit. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give to family members is refusing to enable their poor decisions and requiring them to develop the skills and discipline needed for genuine independence and self-respect. Financial boundaries aren't about punishment or revenge, but rather about creating space for relationships that are based on mutual care and consideration rather than exploitation and dependency. When you stop allowing yourself to be used as an unlimited financial resource, you give family members the opportunity to discover their own capabilities and strengths while protecting your own resources for goals and experiences that align with your values and priorities. The journey toward healthy family relationships is often difficult and sometimes involves temporary or permanent loss of connections that can't survive more equitable terms of engagement. However, the relationships that do survive this process become stronger and more authentic because they're based on genuine appreciation for each other as individuals rather than transactional arrangements that benefit some members at the expense of others. Remember that you have the right to control your own financial resources and to expect basic respect for your autonomy and boundaries from family members just as you would from any other important relationships in your life. Setting limits doesn't make you selfish or uncaring, it makes you responsible for your own well-being and capable of engaging with others from a position of strength and self-respect rather than resentment and exhaustion. 3 years later, I found myself standing in the kitchen of my new townhouse in North Scottsdale, a space I had purchased entirely with my own money and decorated according to my own preferences without any input or financial contributions from family members. The contrast between this moment and the life I had been living during the vacation booking crisis was so stark that sometimes I had to pause and appreciate how fundamentally everything had changed. The townhouse represented far more than just improved living accommodations. It symbolized the financial independence and personal autonomy that had seemed impossible when most of my income was being diverted to family emergencies and lifestyle subsidies. The down payment had come from savings I had accumulated over 2 years of disciplined budgeting made possible only after establishing firm boundaries around family financial requests that had previously consumed every available dollar. The decision-making process for the home purchase had been entirely my own, from selecting the location to choosing the floor plan to negotiating the financing terms. No family members had been consulted about whether the purchase was appropriate or affordable. No guilt-inducing conversations had occurred about whether the money might be better spent on collective family needs. For the first time in my adult life, I had made a major financial decision based solely on my own goals and preferences, and the sense of empowerment that resulted was profound. The mortgage payments were manageable within my budget precisely because they represented my only major financial obligation. Without the constant drain of family loans, emergency contributions, and credit card charges for other people's expenses, my actual financial position was far more stable than I had realized during the years of exploitation. The revelation of how much money I had been providing to family members became clear only after it stopped flowing out of my accounts on a regular basis. The townhouse also provided a sanctuary where I could host friends and colleagues without worrying about family drama or unexpected visits from relatives seeking financial assistance. The space was entirely mine to control and enjoy, free from the anxiety that had characterized my previous living situations where privacy and autonomy were constantly threatened by family members who felt entitled to access my resources and attention whenever convenient for them. My professional life had also transformed dramatically once the mental and emotional energy previously consumed by family crisis management became available for career development and advancement. Within 18 months of establishing financial boundaries, I had received 2 promotions at work, reflecting improved focus and performance that my supervisors noticed and rewarded. The correlation between reduced family stress and increased professional success was undeniable. The promotions brought salary increases that allowed me to pursue interests and experiences that had been impossible during the years of family financial support. I took a photography class that reignited creative passions that had been dormant since college. I joined a hiking group that introduced me to Arizona's natural beauty and provided opportunities to develop friendships with people who shared similar interests. I planned and enjoyed actual vacations that I chose and paid for myself, creating memories that belonged entirely to me. Most significantly, I began dating someone who appreciated my independence and financial responsibility rather than viewing these qualities as resources to be exploited for their benefit. David worked as a software engineer at a different tech company, and our relationship developed organically through shared interests and mutual respect rather than financial convenience or family obligation. The contrast between this healthy romantic relationship and the dysfunctional family dynamics I had finally escaped was striking and educational. David's family operated according to principles of mutual respect and individual autonomy that felt revolutionary compared to the exploitation and manipulation that had characterized my family relationships. Adult children were expected to manage their own finances responsibly, and parents provided emotional support and guidance without demanding financial contributions or access to their children's resources. The interactions I observed during family gatherings demonstrated what healthy boundaries looked like in practice. The relationship with David also provided perspective on how abnormal my family's financial dynamics had been and how much personal growth had been necessary to develop the capacity for healthy romantic partnership. The therapy work I had done to establish boundaries and process family trauma proved invaluable for navigating intimate relationships where mutual respect and consideration were expected rather than exceptional. My relationship with my parents continued to evolve slowly but steadily towards something resembling authentic connection rather than transactional interaction. The business had stabilized at a sustainable level that allowed them to maintain modest but comfortable lifestyle without relying on external financial support. More importantly, they had developed greater appreciation for the effort required to earn and manage money responsibly, making them less likely to view other people's financial resources as available for their use. Mom had returned to work part-time for another real estate agency, contributing to household income while rebuilding professional skills that had atrophied during years of focusing primarily on lifestyle maintenance and crisis management. The work provided structure and purpose that improved her mental health and reduced the anxiety that had driven much of the previous manipulative behavior. Having her own income source also reduced her psychological dependence on Dad's business success and my financial contributions. Dad had embraced the business downsizing and focused approach, finding that smaller projects with higher profit margins were less stressful and more satisfying than the larger contracts that had previously defined success for Henderson Home Solutions. The reduced scope of operations meant less financial risk and greater predictability, allowing him to sleep better and enjoy work more than he had in years. The forced simplification had ultimately improved both business sustainability and personal well-being. Tyler had surprised everyone by demonstrating the most dramatic positive changes in response to the new family financial dynamics. The removal of safety nets and unlimited access to emergency funding had motivated him to develop budgeting skills, career focus, and personal responsibility that had been lacking when external support was readily available. He had been promoted twice at his job and was seriously considering returning to school for professional development that would enhance his earning potential. Tyler's transformation illustrated how enabling family members' poor financial decisions actually prevented them from developing the competence and confidence needed for genuine independence and success. The struggle and occasional failures that accompanied learning to manage money independently had ultimately strengthened his character and increased his self-respect in ways that continuous bailouts never could have achieved. Madison's adjustment to the new family financial reality had been more challenging and inconsistent, but even she had made progress toward greater personal responsibility and realistic expectations about lifestyle costs. She had moved in with roommates to reduce housing expenses and taken a second part-time job to supplement her primary income. While she occasionally expressed resentment about the reduced family financial support, she was gradually learning to align her spending with her actual earning capacity. The most significant change in Madison's situation was her growing understanding that other people weren't obligated to fund her lifestyle preferences or rescue her from the consequences of poor financial decisions. This awareness had been slow to develop and was still fragile, but it represented fundamental progress toward the kind of personal accountability that healthy adult relationships required. The extended family dynamics had also shifted in response to the new boundaries I had established around financial exploitation and manipulation. Some relatives had initially expressed disapproval or concern about my refusal to continue subsidizing family expenses, but most had eventually recognized that the previous arrangement had been unsustainable and inappropriate. The few family members who remained critical of my boundary setting were generally those who had their own problematic relationships with money and personal responsibility. Holiday gatherings had become smaller but more genuine, focused on actual relationship building rather than managing financial crises or negotiating resource allocation. The reduction in artificial drama and manipulation allowed space for normal family interactions based on shared interests and mutual affection. While the relationships weren't perfect, they felt authentic in ways that hadn't been possible when financial dependency and exploitation contaminated every interaction. The therapy work that had been essential for establishing boundaries and managing family conflict had evolved into ongoing personal development that enhanced all areas of my life. Dr. Martinez and I had transitioned from crisis management to broader exploration of goals, values, and relationship patterns that would support continued growth and success. The skills developed during family crisis had proven valuable for navigating workplace challenges, romantic relationships, and friendships with greater confidence and effectiveness. One unexpected benefit of the boundary setting process was the development of more authentic friendships with people who appreciated my personality and interests rather than viewing me as a resource for solving their problems. The pattern of being valued primarily for financial contributions had extended beyond family relationships into friendships where I was expected to pay for group activities, provide loans that were rarely repaid, and cover expenses for people who somehow never had money available when costs arose. The process of recognizing and changing these dynamics in family relationships had provided skills and awareness that allowed me to identify similar patterns in other areas of life and address them before they became deeply embedded and difficult to change. The result was a social circle of people who genuinely enjoyed my company and respected my boundaries rather than tolerating my presence in exchange for financial benefits. Looking back on the $18,000 vacation booking that had initially seemed like the ultimate betrayal, I now recognized it as one of the most valuable learning experiences of my life. The crisis had forced me to confront family dysfunction that might have continued indefinitely if a less dramatic boundary violation had occurred. The extreme nature of the situation had provided clarity and motivation that might not have developed through smaller, more gradual conflicts. The vacation that my family had planned without me using my money had ultimately given me something far more valuable than any resort experience could have provided. It had given me the push I needed to reclaim control over my financial resources and establish boundaries that allowed for authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than exploitation and manipulation. The money that would have been wasted on funding other people's luxury experiences had instead been invested in my own growth, stability, and happiness in ways that created lasting value rather than temporary pleasure. The townhouse, the career advancement, the healthy relationships, the personal interests and experiences I had been able to pursue, all of these positive changes had been made possible by refusing to continue subsidizing a family lifestyle that didn't include me as an equal participant. The skills I had developed for recognizing and responding to financial manipulation had also proven valuable in professional settings where similar dynamics sometimes emerged. Colleagues who consistently forgot their wallets during group lunches, supervisors who hinted that employees should contribute personal resources for office improvements, friends who planned expensive group activities without considering whether everyone could afford to participate. All of these situations became opportunities to practice boundary-setting skills in lower-stakes environments. The confidence that resulted from successfully establishing boundaries with family members who had seemed impossibly powerful and manipulative during my childhood and young adulthood had transformed my approach to all difficult conversations and conflict situations. The realization that I could survive relationship loss and social disapproval when principles and self-respect were at stake had freed me from the fear-based decision-making that had previously characterized most of my interactions with authority figures and important relationships. 5 years after the vacation booking crisis, I received an unexpected phone call from Mom that initially triggered anxiety about potential new financial requests or family emergencies. Instead, the call was simply to share news about a business success that Dad had achieved and to express gratitude for the tough love that had ultimately forced positive changes in family financial management and personal responsibility. The conversation revealed how much Mom's perspective on our family dynamics had changed during the intervening years. She acknowledged that the previous financial arrangements had been unfair and unsustainable, and she expressed genuine appreciation for my courage in establishing boundaries that had seemed harsh at the time but had ultimately benefited everyone involved. The ability to have this kind of honest, reflective conversation demonstrated real growth in our relationship. Most surprisingly, Mom mentioned that she and Dad had been recommending financial boundary setting to other parents whose adult children were struggling with money management and personal responsibility. They had learned through experience that providing unlimited financial support often prevented rather than promoted healthy development, and they were sharing this hard-won wisdom with friends facing similar challenges. This evolution in their perspective represented the kind of fundamental change that I had hoped for but hadn't dared to expect during the darkest periods of family conflict. The recognition that healthy boundaries actually strengthen relationships rather than damaging them had become integrated into their worldview in ways that would hopefully prevent future problems and improve their interactions with Tyler and Madison as well. The phone call ended with an invitation to a small family dinner celebrating Dad's business milestone, extended without any expectation of financial contribution or hidden agenda. The invitation felt genuine rather than strategic, representing the kind of normal family interaction that had been impossible when every gathering was contaminated by financial tensions and unspoken expectations about resource sharing. Today, as I write this story from my home office in the townhouse I bought with money that would have previously been diverted to family financial emergencies, I feel profound gratitude for the crisis that had seemed so devastating at the time. The vacation booking that had initially felt like the ultimate betrayal had actually been the catalyst for positive changes that transformed every aspect of my life in ways that continue to provide benefits years later. The journey from financial exploitation to healthy boundaries hadn't been easy or quick, but it had been worth every difficult conversation, every moment of anxiety about potential relationship loss, every instance of standing firm despite emotional pressure and manipulation. The authentic relationships and genuine independence that resulted from this process were far more valuable than any temporary peace that might have come from continued compliance with unreasonable demands. The most important lesson I learned was that people who truly care about your well-being will respect your boundaries and work within them, while those who resist limits are revealing that they value you primarily for what you can provide, rather than for who you are as a person. This distinction became a reliable guide for evaluating all relationships and deciding how much emotional energy and trust to invest in various connections. Setting financial boundaries with family members isn't about punishment or revenge, but rather about creating space for relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care rather than exploitation and dependency. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable poor decisions and require people to develop the skills they need for independence and self-respect. Have you found yourself funding family experiences that somehow never include you as an actual participant? Have you struggled with guilt about prioritizing your own financial security over family members who seem to have endless crises requiring your intervention? The process of establishing healthy limits is challenging but necessary for maintaining relationships that enhance rather than drain your life energy and resources. Remember that financial boundaries aren't selfish but responsible, protecting not only your own well-being but also creating opportunities for family members to develop genuine competence and independence. True love doesn't require unlimited access to your resources, and healthy relationships can survive and even thrive when both parties respect each other's autonomy and boundaries. The courage to establish financial boundaries may temporarily disrupt family harmony, but it creates space for more authentic connections based on mutual appreciation rather than transactional convenience. The relationships that survive this transition become stronger and more genuine because they're built on respect for each other as individuals rather than exploitation of resources and emotional manipulation. Your financial resources belong to you, and you have both the right and the responsibility to use them in ways that align with your values and support your goals. Family membership doesn't grant unlimited access to your assets, and setting limits doesn't make you cruel or uncaring, but rather demonstrates healthy self-respect and appropriate boundaries that benefit everyone involved in the long run. 7 years have passed since that pivotal Tuesday evening when I discovered the $18,000 vacation charge that changed the trajectory of my entire life. As I sit in my home office this morning, reviewing the financial portfolio that has grown steadily through disciplined saving and smart investments, I'm struck by how completely my relationship with money has transformed from those desperate years of constant family financial emergencies. The investment account that now holds over $200,000 represents far more than accumulated wealth. Each dollar in that account symbolizes a choice to prioritize my own financial future over someone else's immediate desires, a decision to build long-term security rather than providing short-term relief for problems I didn't create. The compound growth over these years demonstrates what becomes possible when money is allowed to work for the person who earned it rather than being immediately redistributed to fund other people's lifestyle choices. Last month, I received a promotion to marketing director at my company, a position that comes with significant salary increase and equity participation that will accelerate my journey toward complete financial independence. The promotion was earned through consistent performance and leadership development that became possible only after the mental energy previously consumed by family financial crises was redirected toward professional growth and career advancement. The interview process for the promotion included presentations about strategic initiatives and budget management that drew heavily on the financial discipline and boundary-setting skills I had developed through necessity during the family crisis years. The ability to make difficult decisions about resource allocation, resist pressure for unwise spending, and maintain focus on long-term objectives despite short-term emotional appeals had proven valuable in corporate environments where similar dynamics often emerge around departmental budgets and competing priorities. My colleagues who served on the promotion committee specifically mentioned my reputation for financial responsibility and strategic thinking as factors that influenced their recommendation. The professional success that resulted from personal boundary setting created a positive feedback loop where career advancement provided additional resources and confidence that strengthened my ability to maintain healthy limits in all areas of life. The townhouse I purchased 3 years ago has appreciated significantly in value, creating equity that provides additional financial security and options for future real estate investments. More importantly, the stability of homeownership has allowed me to create a living environment that reflects my personality and preferences without input or interference from family members who had previously felt entitled to influence major life decisions. David and I celebrated our second anniversary last weekend with a trip to Sedona that we planned and paid for together, each contributing according to our individual financial capacity without any expectation that one person should subsidize the other's participation. The mutual respect and financial compatibility that characterizes our relationship stands in sharp contrast to the exploitative dynamics that had defined my family interactions for so many years. Our relationship has progressed to discussions about marriage and shared financial goals that feel exciting rather than anxiety-provoking because they're based on partnership between equals rather than dependency or obligation. The prenuptial agreement we're considering isn't about lack of trust but rather about maintaining the individual financial autonomy that has been essential for both of our personal growth and professional success. David's family has welcomed me warmly while respecting the boundaries I've established around financial independence and decision-making autonomy. Their ability to appreciate my success without viewing it as a resource available for their use has been healing in ways I didn't anticipate. The contrast between their healthy approach to adult family relationships and the dysfunction I had previously accepted as normal continues to provide perspective and validation for the choices I made during the crisis years. Tyler's transformation has continued to surprise and inspire everyone who knew him during his years of financial dependence and poor decision-making. He completed a professional certification program last year that led to a management position with a construction company, allowing him to earn a salary that supports the lifestyle he wants without external assistance. The confidence and self-respect that resulted from genuine independence have improved every aspect of his life, including romantic relationships and friendships that are now based on mutual respect rather than financial convenience. More significantly, Tyler has begun contributing to a retirement account and building an emergency fund that would have been impossible when his money management consisted primarily of requesting bailouts whenever spending exceeded income. The financial literacy he developed through necessity has made him an advocate for personal responsibility and boundary setting in his own social circle, helping friends recognize when they're being exploited by family members or romantic partners who view them primarily as financial resources. Tyler's girlfriend Jennifer mentioned during a recent family gathering that she was initially intimidated by his family's financial independence and high expectations around personal responsibility. However, she has come to appreciate how these qualities create stability and reduce the drama and crisis management that had characterized her previous relationships with men who lacked financial discipline and personal accountability. Madison's progress has been more gradual but equally meaningful in its own way. She moved out of her shared living situation last year into her own studio apartment, a milestone that represented genuine independence rather than another form of subsidized housing. The pride she expressed about making this transition entirely through her own financial resources was touching and demonstrated growth that wouldn't have been possible if family bailouts had remained available. Madison has also developed interests and friendships that aren't based on expensive activities or lifestyle consumption that exceeded her financial capacity. Her involvement in community theater as a costume designer has provided creative outlets and social connections while building skills that could eventually supplement her primary income. The shift from passive consumption to active participation and skill development has improved her self-esteem and sense of purpose in ways that material purchases never could have achieved. Most importantly, Madison has stopped expressing resentment about the family's financial boundaries and has begun acknowledging that learning to live within her means has actually reduced stress and increased her appreciation for experiences and possessions she can afford independently. The maturity required for this level of self-reflection represents fundamental character development that benefits every aspect of her adult life. My parents have thrived in ways that surprised everyone, including themselves, once the pressure of maintaining appearances and funding an unsustainable lifestyle was removed. Dad's business has found its optimal size and service focus, providing steady income without the stress and risk that had characterized the previous approach to growth and client acquisition. The smaller scale of operations has allowed him to focus on quality and customer satisfaction rather than constantly seeking new revenue sources to service mounting debt obligations. Mom has developed a successful real estate practice that specializes in helping downsizing clients find appropriate housing for their changing needs. Her personal experience with scaling back lifestyle and housing has provided credibility and empathy that resonates with clients facing similar transitions. The irony that the crisis, which had initially seemed catastrophic, ultimately led to career fulfillment and professional success hasn't been lost on any of us. Their marriage has also improved significantly since financial pressure and crisis management no longer dominate their daily lives and conversations. The anxiety and conflict that had characterized their relationship during the years of business struggle and lifestyle maintenance pressure have been replaced by contentment and mutual support that had been missing for so long that everyone had forgotten what normal marital harmony looked like. The Henderson family gatherings that now occur several times per year have evolved into genuinely enjoyable experiences focused on relationship building and shared activities rather than crisis management and resource negotiation. The absence of underlying financial tension has allowed space for normal family interactions, including humor and affection that had been crowded out by constant stress and manipulation during the crisis years. Last Thanksgiving, we established a new tradition of sharing gratitude not just for general blessings but specifically for lessons learned through difficult experiences that ultimately led to positive changes. My contribution focused on appreciation for the vacation booking crisis that had seemed so devastating at the time but had actually catalyzed growth and transformation that improved every aspect of my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. The other family members shared similar reflections about how the financial crisis and boundary setting process had ultimately strengthened our relationships and individual character development. The ability to have these honest conversations about past dysfunction while celebrating current health and stability demonstrated how completely our family dynamics had transformed over the intervening years. Financial boundaries that had initially felt punitive and relationship threatening had ultimately created space for authentic connections based on mutual respect and genuine interest in each other's well-being as individuals rather than resources to be managed and utilized. The relationships that survived the transition to healthier dynamics became stronger and more meaningful because they were built on appreciation for personal qualities rather than transactional convenience. The extended family has also benefited from observing our transformation and learning from our experience with financial boundary setting and crisis recovery. Several cousins and family friends have implemented similar changes in their own situations after witnessing how much happier and more stable everyone became once exploitative dynamics were eliminated and replaced with appropriate expectations and mutual respect. As I prepare for the next phase of my life, including potential marriage, homeownership upgrades, and continued career advancement, I feel profound gratitude for the crisis that had initially seemed like the end of family relationships but had actually been the beginning of authentic connections based on healthy principles and mutual consideration. The $18,000 vacation I never took gave me something far more valuable than any resort experience could have provided. The courage to establish financial boundaries when relationships and social approval seem to hang in the balance has created a life of genuine independence and self-respect that continues to provide benefits years after the initial crisis was resolved. The authentic relationships and financial security that resulted from this process are worth far more than any temporary peace that might have come from continued compliance with unreasonable demands and exploitative expectations. Remember that your financial resources belong to you, and protecting them isn't selfish but responsible stewardship that ultimately benefits everyone involved by encouraging independence and personal growth rather than enabling dependency and poor decision-making. The relationships that respect your boundaries will strengthen over time, while those that require unlimited access to your resources weren't based on genuine care and appreciation for who you are as a person. Financial boundaries create space for authentic love and respect to flourish by removing the transactional elements that contaminate relationships when some members exist primarily to fund other members' lifestyle choices and crisis management. The temporary discomfort of establishing limits is worth the long-term benefits of relationships based on mutual consideration and genuine appreciation for each other's individual worth and autonomy. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.